So silver fighters are generally in a pretty awkward spot. On paper, they're weaker than golds because of their lower base stats. But at the same time, they have to be held at a similar standard. I mean, if a silver isn't good enough to be on par with a gold fighter, then why bother? If all I wanted is a decent fighter for a low cost, I can just invest and evolve one of my many good bronzes. In fact, a good number of silvers are outdone by their bronze counterparts. For example, Bad Hair Day is arguably better than the Silver Phileas. Sheltered is arguably better than the Silver Parasols except maybe for Shadow Ops. And Cold Stones is definitely better than the Silver Beowulfs. Fortunately, there are a few silvers that live up to these standards and are worth investing and evolving all the way to diamond. This video will showcase 5 of these fighters. What is up guys, and this is episode 4 of my Skullgirls mobile newbie guide. But before I start, just a disclaimer. In reality, there are probably more than 5 silvers worth evolving all the way. In fact, I will be making a list of honorable mentions in the description. What sets these 5 fighters I'm about to discuss apart from the rest is the frequency at which I see them used in high-rank rift battles. Although this does not automatically make them the top 5 silvers in the game, they have at least been tried and tested at the highest level of play. Real talk, I guess what I'm really trying to say here is, don't be a salty bitch if your favorite silver is not in this video. Please and thank you. Alright, so let's start with fighter number 1. No, not you. So the first silver fighter on this list is Toad Warrior. Toad is a fart-type Cerebella variant that specializes in high damage output that relies on meter. She's a reference to that old beat-em-up game Battletoads. Wait, what Game Boy? Are you kidding me? So her signature ability is called Turbo Tunnel, which is apparently a level from one of the Battletoads games. What am I even looking at? Anyway, this ability gives her 3% meter gain per second while near an opponent. It also gives her a 50% damage bonus when a blockbuster is fully charged. With a decent 11,000 attack stat combined with a 50% damage bonus and blockbuster spam potential from her meter gain, she's definitely an offensive juggernaut at all levels of the game. Gameplay-wise, there's not much to talk about. She's pretty straightforward. Just do Cerebella things and you either deal enough damage or you don't. For her MARQUEE ability, you want to give her upper hand for meter control. For her moveset, just make sure she has Diamond Drop and Diamonds Are Forever, and you can pretty much do whatever you want with the rest. Lastly, it's important to note her 2 distinct weaknesses. First is her reliance on meter. If her meter gain is prematurely disabled by a Lovecrafted, for example, she's denied the 50% damage bonus. Her second weakness is a relatively low HP. Bellas are normally bulky enough to take a hit or two even against hard-hitting opponents. This one, not so much. Just take note of these when using her. Next up is Perfect Dark. She's a Dark-type Misfortune variant that specializes in buff denial and burst damage. Her signature ability is called Rare Sightings. This ability inflicts Timeless Curse and Deathmark after 10 seconds in play. The second part of her ability gives her head hits a 10% chance to instantly beat opponents that are suffering from Deathmark and are below 50% health. Most of why Perfect Dark is so good is the first part of her signature ability. Curse is very effective against defenders that rely on buffs like Untouchable, Resonant Evil, and in this fight, that's all folks. With Curse in play, I no longer have to worry about evasion. Now as for the second part of her ability, the instant kill is something that I wouldn't go out of my way to attempt too often. Headless mode is pretty risky, especially for people like me who suck, so attempt the instant kills at your own risk. By the way, I already discussed the best stats for attackers and defenders back in episode 3. So from here on out, I will only discuss additional stats that are specific to the fighter being featured. For Perfect Dark, crit rate gives a nice booster damage output because her Deathmark increases crit damage by 50%. It's also important to note her ability to inflict debuffs happens only once per tag in. So if your opponent happens to have resistance, your ability can whiff. Because of this, investing in accuracy is also not a bad idea. For her moves, I mostly like Cat Scratch Fever, Fiber Upper, and L-Cat. The rest depends on needs and preferences. So the standard MARQUEE for offensive fortunes is always boop. But if for some reason you're using her for defense a lot, you can invest in for a bit more sustain with regen. Just a final precaution. It will be a huge risk using her against marqueed pain wheels. Even if Curse hard counters Grudge, Tainted Blood is potentially fatal. Next up, we have Doublicious. She's a light-type double variant who specializes in dismantling buff-based elemental teams. Her signature ability is called Sticky Fingers. This ability gives her a 25% chance on hit to transfer one buff from the opponent to herself. It also gives her a 25% chance when hit to transfer one debuff to the opponent. This includes blocked hits. Now I have to talk about the Chaos Marquee for a bit. The Chaos Marquee inflicts a random debuff every time double lands a critical hit while at an elemental advantage. The combination of Sticky Fingers and Chaos is what makes her really powerful. The game plan is to give her a lot of crit rate, switch to an elemental advantage, and bombard the opponent with debuffs until they die. Sticky Fingers is what makes Doublicious the best user of this marquee ability. She can steal opponents' buffs on hit, most notably immunity. This leaves the defense with very little outs and at the mercy of stacks upon stacks of debuffs. But she does have a few counters. Fighters with no element like Overclocked are completely immune to the Chaos Marquee, so you might want to avoid that matchup altogether. Dreadlocks is a soft counter to Doublicious because of the damage reflect. However, you can play around this by using the Bandwagon Blockbuster to inflict Hex. Finally, Pain Wheels with a Tainted Blood Marquee are absolutely hard counters to Doublicious. Being a crit-dependent fighter, Doublicious will be taking a lot of reflected damage. Sadly, she has one other weakness that is something that we can never avoid: bad luck. There will be times when it'll take too much time to finally switch to the desired element, and you will end up with not enough time to close out the fight. Take note, Doublicious attack stat is less than 10,000. It's considerably less than offensive double staples like Jawbreaker and Xenomorph. So although she's the best user of the Chaos Marquee, she is on the other hand the most dependent on it. Nonetheless, Chaos Doublicious with her Sticky Fingers has established herself as one of the best attackers, not just among the silvers, but in the entire game. Next up, we have Killjoy, a light-type Valentine variant that is without a doubt at least a top 3 support in Skullgirls Mobile. She's a reference to a character who has most likely handled the most balls in the history of the universe. I mean, I don't even think joy is her name, it's just her dominant emotion, because of how much she loves her job. Her signature ability is called Pride and Joy. It gives the entire team the ability to gain 1 stack of permanent regen when first dropping below 50% health while at an elemental advantage. As you can see, a single stack of regen doesn't really impact the fight state all too much, but at least it lasts the entire fight. The second part of her ability resurrects her teammates at 25% health when she dies. So keep track of her dead teammates and they're back. This is the ability that makes her a top tier support. Now generally, there are 2 ways to use her. As an offensive support, the Trauma Center Marquee ability is great to give her teammates 2 layers of protection. 1 layer to protect them from dying, and the other layer to revive them when they do happen to die. When used purely as an offensive support, you might not even need to evolve her anymore. She'll mostly just be a backline fighter that protects the rest of the team with Final Stand. Her only purpose when she does make it up front is to die and revive your main offensive lineup. But when using her as a defender, that kind of setup isn't as consistent. A lot of times, the AI decides to tag out when at low health, prematurely exposing Killjoy. I personally find Trauma Center to be less useful when in the hands of the AI. This is why I prefer to give her ICU to give her a bit of sustain against debuff-based fighters. It also helps that she's a light-type fighter, which means she benefits from powerful catalysts like Last Words and Lightweight. And I guess it goes without saying, but if you plan to use her as a defender, you definitely need to evolve and invest in her stats. For moves, make sure she has Forbidden Procedure since the AI is pretty accurate when using this blockbuster to revive teammates. Burst is also a good defensive move to break combos. Mortuary Drop is an unblockable special and is a cheap way to shave health off opponents. And finally, I believe almost all defenders need to have a level 3 blockbuster equipped to apply some pressure to attackers. So finally, we move on to our last fighter. It's everyone's favorite opponent, Resonant Evil. He's a Dark-type Big Band variant that specializes in driving new players to quit and uninstall the game. He's a reference to Anti-Hope God of Despair. I mean, he has to be, right? I mean, why else would a silver be so efficiently designed to torture players? So his signature ability is called Master of Unblocking. It gives him a 10% chance to gain a 10-second armor when hit. So here I'm trying to record some footage of him getting armor, but it's been over a minute and he's almost dead. Still no armor. Come on, anytime today, please. Okay, seriously, are you kidding me? Alright, there we go. I just wanted to show you guys the armor. While benefiting from armor, he also gets a 5% chance when hit to inflict a 4-second stun. So here I'm trying to demonstrate the stun, and as you can see, any second now. I mean, he's taking a beating. It's gonna happen, right? It's gonna happen before he dies. Okay, excuse me, what the f- So being a defender, there's barely any gameplay to talk about. You're not supposed to use him for offense anyway. His attack stat is below 6,000, which is absolutely horrible. This is my dog Sparky. Sparky is small and weak. If he were in Skullgirls Mobile, his attack stat would be above 6,000. Anyway, you get my point. Don't use Resident Evil for offense, okay? For stats, just the usual defense, meter gain, and HP is fine. Since a lot of people are gonna try and counter him with debuffs like Armor Break or Curse, Resistance is also a nice stat to invest in, you sadistic monster. For the Marquee ability, it definitely depends on where you want him. If you plan to use him as a one-on-one defender, soloist is the way to go. If you plan to put him in a team, then go for frontman. For Rift defense, put him anywhere you like. People are gonna hate you all the same. Catalysts that go well with him are Dark Nut and Futile Resistance. But who are we kidding? Even if you gave him like Frost Armor, some genius is still gonna lose to it, right? So that's it guys, hope you all learned something. Now if you'll excuse me, I'll beat up this Resident Evil because apparently he can never stun you. I mean, my Diamond Resident Evil went the whole fight without a single stun. Excuse me, what the f-